Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our project webinar this evening. My name is David Johnson. I'm the CEO of LEOcrowdfunding, and we are an equity property crowdfunding platform. We're hosting this special project webinar tonight on behalf of Thurlestone House down in St Ives in Cornwall. First of all, delighted to have the principal of this project, Mark Fernihough. Hi, Mark, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. To do this again, and it's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic to have you. I'm going to bring on Brenda next, who is our project coordinator, and she'll be keeping an eye out for any sort of compliance sensitivities on the broadcast tonight, and keeping everybody right if we sort of stray over the line, as well as to keep an eye on the Q&A. So, hello, Brenda. How are you?
Good evening. Or as John would say, I'm just going to steal his line, good day, because he's in a funny time zone. So that covers everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the way to do it. That's the professional webinar person talks about just good day. And I'm delighted to bring on as a special co-host tonight, Mr. John Corey, and I'll explain your role in a minute. But good, John, to have you. How are you?
Very good. Good day to you.
Excellent. So let's get straight into it. This is the second webinar in a series of 3. So we did an initial, if you will, an introductory project webinar on this project about 2 weeks ago. And as you can see on the screen, there's another one of these happening next Wednesday at 7 p.m. So this is number 2. If you are watching it, I would encourage you actually probably to pause this if you're watching the recording and go back and watch number 1. Because it will set the scene more about the details of the project. So before we dive into all the ins and outs and again set the scene of what we're trying to achieve tonight, let me give the sort of compliance and regulatory umbrella. So we are a platform, we're an appointed representative. And if you look on the bottom there, you can actually see our FRN number and just the text there, LEOcrowdfunding is an appointed representative of Sharon Limited, which is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Pitches for investment are not offered to the public, and investments can only be made by registered investors on the basis of information provided by LEOcrowdfunding. So we're an equity property crowdfunding platform. Projects are hosted on our site. Investors register on the site, go through an investor ready process, and then look at the information and decide to invest if they think it is for them. Property is, of course, a high-risk sector, according to the Financial Conduct Authority, so please bear that in mind when it comes to analysing any investment opportunity. But I think what is important to highlight is that this slide presentation tonight, and indeed the equity offer document, it has been approved as a financial promotion. So what you're seeing tonight has been looked at by an FCA principal and approved. So it gives you the comfort, at least the information provided has been through a due diligence process, but still you make the decision if this is for you or not. So as I said, we had an initial webinar, and on that webinar we covered a bit about Mark and his team, the project, the location, a brief look at the financials, and pointed everyone towards the equity offer document. So that is the first recording. If you go to our YouTube channel, YouTube/LEOcrowdfunding, you'll be able to watch that recording. And you can also see some of the questions that come out of that recording on our forum. Now, there were a number of questions on the forum. There are questions following up the last webinar. So this second webinar is designed to answer those questions. It's one of the things I love about property crowdfunding is this interaction between potential investors and the fundraiser. So tonight what we're going to get into is a bit more what I call peeling back the layers of the onion. We're going to look a bit more at the income analysis and obviously the seasonality that plays into that, looking at the booking model, nightly rates, COVID stress test. You can see there the other aspects that we're covering tonight, the automated model and the commercial versus residential valuation. So really trying to really get into how this is put together as a potential investment, and from Mark's point of view, the different moving parts, the different income streams that flow into this project. So that's the second webinar, and then the third one will again deal with any questions that arise out of the forums, etc. So I don't know, John, do you want to make any brief comment on that, John, before we move on?
No, I think
should have actually maybe I should just made the full introduction. So as many know, John is someone who knows a lot about crowdfunding, a lot about property, and he's on tonight to provide a little bit of expertise. He does work with Mark, and he is on the advisory board of LEOcrowdfunding, but not employed by the company or a shareholder in the company anyway. So very much on tonight, independently, giving his input into this model.
Yeah, I think maybe a more accurate way to represent tonight is I've been working with Mark for quite some time and guiding him through the process, and also some things specific to his business. So I have a lot of knowledge of how Mark arrived at this point. So I'm going to facilitate the questions. Mark will answer them. I won't. He'll answer them. And we'll get to probably 3 of these on one slide. You'll see it later. And then we'll cover the other 2 in other slides. So.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. So, Mark, over to you. I want to give a quick overview on yourself and a bit about your Prosper Property.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. So, historically, I used to be a car dealer, and we realized at some point that actually the car dealership wasn't for us anymore. So we made the decision to basically transition all of our interests from one industry to another, basically. And did a lot of invested a lot of time and money into property training, business training, and started our journey full time in 2017. And since then, we've built a portfolio of owned and managed properties, running this exact business model. And here's just a few of those. So Ocean House was a property we secured in 2019. We've run it for a number of 3 years there, and obviously considerable sort of uplift in value. Same with Oasis House as well. It runs exactly the same business model, and Seascape is the latest one in Penzance, which went live last year. So yeah, just a little bit of an overview of a few of the properties, basically.
Excellent, thank you. And I should point out that the Ocean House, the first one here on the screen, there is a case study on this one on our platform. So Mark uploaded this probably about 15, 16 months ago. So you can actually look at that project. It'll also give you an understanding of how Mark structures these opportunities and a bit more about his business model. So feel free to go there and find the case study. So again, Mark, just run us through the high level. Obviously, in our first broadcast, this is in more detail. But for tonight, you want to give us sort of the bird's eye view of the project, please?
Yeah, sure. So this is a traditional guest house currently in Carbis Bay in St Ives. So we are going to be converting the sort of unused or unsellable space, so the lounges and the dining room, into 3 new ensuite rooms, because obviously it's the ensuite rooms that make the money. We'll also be creating a really nice residential kitchen diner for guests to use if they want. And we're going to touch on that a bit later on as well. And the whole property will be refurbished to total 13 sort of automated self-catering SA units when we're finished.
Excellent, thank you. And one thing I just love every time I do these with you and helping to prepare this project over the last number of months, extremely envious when you see the picture with the beautiful beaches that you have down there. But in terms of location, do you want to just give a quick sort of highlight of where this property is and sort of what's around it?
Yeah, sure. So obviously most people have heard of St Ives. It's a lovely fishing village, super famous for lots of reasons. And Carbis Bay literally is a village about a mile from St Ives itself. You literally just drive through Carbis Bay into St Ives. It's actually where they held the G7 summit last year, or the year before. So all the world leaders were here. So it's really close, very central to lots and lots of different areas, whether that be Land's End, the Lizard Peninsula, all the sort of, it's just very central in West Cornwall, basically. So you can get to everywhere really, really quickly. I went through that obviously in more detail last week, but yeah, it's it's in the perfect location, basically.
I can just picture Joe Biden and Angela Merkel and all the world leaders walking along the beach before breakfast.
There was lots of photos, yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
That
Okay.
was like 3 prime ministers ago.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I
Right.
was trying to think
Yeah.
who the US president was, but yeah, it'd been much harder to work out who the British prime minister was. That's a good point, John.
It was Boris at the time.
It
was
was.
Boris. It was Boris.
Mhm.
Very good. So in terms then of the actual deal, because obviously this is an investment opportunity we're promoting tonight for would-be investors. So this is very much an income type investment opportunity. It'd be the opportunity to be sharing in rental as one source of revenue, which we'll be getting to later. But do you want to just cover off, Mark, some of the key stats?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the projected return is 12.3 per annum, and that's the internal rate of return. The total raise amount is 386,000. It's a 7-year project with an element of repayment via the profit from the property, but also from refinancing as well, which we'll touch on later on. And yeah, the minimum amount is only £100, but obviously we hope that everyone that wants to invest obviously is going to invest more than that, obviously. That's just the minimum.
Yeah, and it is an important, I'll just sort of expand that a bit. I mean, clearly many people have already invested larger sums than that, appropriate to them. But one opportunity is the education side, where for those that are maybe just starting out on their property investment journey, and very often people are inhibited by what they can invest in if they don't have large sums, whereas crowdfunding and Mark, the way you've structured this, allows the masses, multiple people to come in even at a lower amount and be part of your journey. I know that's something that does excite you in terms of the education side, that you're sort of creating an investor tribe that through time will be part of your community.
Yeah, that is definitely the plan, because obviously it's a very different strategy to say more traditional strategies, whether that's sort of building new builds or just sort of standard buy-to-lets or standard HMOs. This is it is different. So I understand that, yeah, there's always lots and lots of questions around it, because obviously it is different to a lot of things. There's a lot of elements to it. So actually, people being able to invest smaller amounts and then sort of actually come along on the journey to actually see how it works through the lifetime of the project is something that we want to do, because then obviously, hopefully going forward, people will over time, want to invest again in our future projects. So,
Yes, John.
So there's also, just to reiterate, there's a risk warning on the screen. There's a risk warning throughout the documents that you need to be prepared to lose your investment. There's no guarantees. There's nothing that you can do to make sure that that wouldn't happen other than do your own due diligence. And by being able to put in a small amount, you can dip your toe in the water. You can put in the amount at a level that you're comfortable with. It doesn't matter what other people put in. It doesn't matter what other people think. It's what you're comfortable with. And you have to set that at whatever level is appropriate, so that if you did lose it, it wouldn't make any difference to your life.
Correct.
And
Okay,
it's
so
also an element in their diversification too, which is also one of our key points.
Yep, that's a very good point, Brenda. So I'm going to sort of hand over to John now, who's going to host these next couple of slides as we kind of deep dive into some of the questions. Remind people you can use the Q&A function. So if you do have a question, something that John or Mark says, or you're not sure about something, please do put your questions into the Q&A. Don't use the chat box, into the Q&A, and there'll be an opportunity at the end, time permitting, to deal with some of those questions. If they're not dealt with on the webinar tonight, then they'll be added to the forum, and Mark will deal with them in the forum. So either way, you will get your questions answered. So John, over to you.
Yeah, so what's interesting about Mark's business is it's slightly different than possibly some others. And this is this has come out by some questions people have raised. A number of people have put questions in the forum or raised it some other way. So we wanted to cover 3 of the 5 questions that are on the earlier agenda by focusing on this slide, discussing the income, the model, the seasonality. We'll see a little bit of the seasonality also in a later slide. So Mark, let's talk about income analysis and seasonality, as I just said, your booking model and the nightly rates and how that varies across the seasons, and this automated model or this automated business that you use for check-in, check-out.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the most obvious thing is, and the first question that people normally ask is about the seasonality. And obviously, the UK tourist industry is clearly very, very seasonal, because winter's winter and summer is summer, and hopefully it's pretty good. But obviously most people want to travel in the summer and make the most of obviously the weather. So we can charge far more in high season than we can obviously in the off season and the mid season. So it is really seasonal. And this gives a good indication as to obviously how seasonal it is, I suppose, really. So generally, we're charging sort of 3 or a bit more times as much in the high season as in the off season, as you can see there. And then obviously there's event rates as well, which would be sort of classed as special weeks in St. Ives, Christmases and things like that. So it shows what the rates are at the different times of the year, because we are really seasonal, and obviously it makes a big difference. But the majority of the money is made in the summer, but even in the off season, these buildings are profitable. But obviously the majority of the income comes in the summer, as you'd expect. And then the occupancy is different as well. So as you can see there, there's 60% occupancy forecast in the off season, 75 mid season, and 90 in the high season. And in reality, it's actually more than 90 in the high season. You're getting on sort of towards 100. But obviously we forecast sensibly and conservatively. We aim, and our sort of ethos is to sort of under promise and over deliver ultimately. So the forecasts have to be
Mark, given the location, are there things for people to do that are not like go to the beach on a warm day?
Yeah. There's loads of stuff for people to do. People come to the Southwest for all sorts of different reasons, whether it's sort of all the historic stuff, coastal path walks, and even actually in the winter, we do have a fair bit of business from contractors as well. So although our model is 100% focused on tourists, because tourists will pay more money, but obviously we do get other types of business, mainly in the off season, because the rates are very different to the high season as well.
So in the St. Ives specific area where this property is there not some sort of art angle or community or museum or other attractions that have nothing to do with water?
Yeah, there is. Yes, there's the Tate Modern or the Tate Gallery. Yeah, there we go.
God. How could that be?
Yeah, St. Ives is super famous for painting. Apparently the light in St. Ives is better than everywhere else in the world. Who knows?
So part of what I'm highlighting then is, let's go into the demographics, the type of guests that would stay at your place. Are these people with 6 kids that are dropping ice creams on the carpet? Or is this older couples with money to burn who go out to restaurants?
It's generally professional couples and retired wealthier couples. So they pay the most amount of money, and they're eating out all the time as well. So most people, our average length of stay is 3 days, and people are out and about just doing stuff the whole time. So they're using it as a base, and somewhere to sleep. And if they want to sort of throw some sandwiches together in the kitchen, there's a kitchen diner provided, but most people don't use it because it's not what they're there for. They're out and about, eating in the cafes, eating in the bars and in the pubs and restaurants, basically.
Now, in the immediate area or a slightly wider area, you're making claims about the demographics, how they use the kitchen, all the rest. Do you already have other properties?
Yeah, so we've got multiple properties running this exact model, and that's how we know that even with 13 bedrooms, for example, in this property, and only having one kitchen diner, which is a communal kitchen diner, it still works because the majority of people, they don't use the kitchen diner, but it's something that is nice to have. It looks fantastic in the photos, and obviously the people that want to use it can. Simple as that, basically.
And what is this automated mode or automated sort of check-in or whatever it is that you're talking about when you say automated?
So everything we do, the whole business is as systems and software driven as is physically possible. It keeps us lean and keeps our costs down, basically. So all the properties are self-check-in and self-check-out. All the guest communication is electronic. So everything is sort of run through guest management software, and it delivers everything as it should, and gives people the information that they need to enjoy their trip, to get in the property at the right time, and have a great stay, but also keep our costs low.
Okay, well, right before we go on, I want to point out to everybody who is watching this either live and recording, page 30 in the equity offer document is where you'll find this table. Use the form if you have more questions. If you are watching or you read it and then you read it a second time and now you have a new question, perfectly fine. Stick it in the form. It's specific, so all shareholders and anybody that's thinking of being a shareholder can see the same information. That's why we like everybody to see the questions and see Mark's answers when he posts them. So David, could you go on a slide? So this is also in the document. You'll find it. It's sort of pops out at you in the document. It shows you how the profits will be dealt with and how they're split between the investors from the crowd and Mark's company. David, can you go on?
Actually, I didn't miss one there. I didn't. It's okay.
So Mark, use this slide to talk about this commercial versus residential.
Yeah, so we acquire the properties on a bricks and mortar valuation. And the reason for that is the majority or all of these properties, they are generally run by sort of Mr. and Mrs. Semi-retired lifestyle sort of business owners, really. And they generally only trade up to the VAT threshold on the sort of small to medium sized properties. Some of the bigger properties, people are VAT registered, but they are generally still only open for 4 or 5 months of the year. So all of these, and so because then they haven't got sort of seasoned good accounts, all the properties are valued on bricks and mortar. So what we do is we come in, we run these properties all year round. We maximize the income. We produce monthly management information on all the properties, and then obviously annual accounts. And we're able then, after a 3-year period, to actually get an income-based commercial valuation on these properties. And that's part of the model, basically.
Okay. And just to highlight something I know, because I've talked to you before about this, these generally are C1 properties, so they're already under planning. They're already considered a commercial property. They're not ordinary residential properties. So that's part of the logic behind revaluation later as a commercial property, if you can show the books and records. Is there anything else you wanted to cover on this slide, Mark?
I suppose it makes sense to just run through the fact that obviously what we will be doing is refurbishing the property the moment that we get it to, and then actually refinancing once we've carried out the refurbishment. Then we'll actually be refinancing again at year 4 with the commercial valuation, once we've got obviously all the records and books and accounts, and then running it out to year 7 for another revaluation as well as part of the deal, basically. But all of that information is covered in more detail in the equity offer document. So that's where everyone needs to go, really.
I'm going to encourage people, you need to read the document. It's part of being a professional investor, is you read the documentation. So can we go to the next slide, David?
Yeah, can I just throw in one quick comment there, or ask you, Mark, maybe just to highlight again your refinance points as you go along. For investors, that will involve some funds returning to them.
Yes,
Is that correct?
Exactly that. I should have mentioned that. Yeah,
That's
so
okay.
there's a profit share and also repayment from these refinances along the timeline, basically. So there's two upsides, I suppose, and that is the actual income of the property and then the refinancing of the property from us adding value.
Yeah, and that's really important because some investors have questioned, well, it's a 7-year project and they've assumed, well, I have to wait 7 years to receive any funds back, and that's not the case. You've built in periods of refinance where funds can, a portion of funds can come back to the investors. So it was just to make that really clear.
Yeah,
John, back over to you.
Yep. So there'll be regular disbursements after the place is operational and when there's refinance. Now, this slide is also in the information in the offer document, right, Mark? Or is this from the
No,
case
this is part of the Ocean House case study that's also on the platform, but it's a totally separate document.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And we're going to use it here just to highlight something about COVID and what happens when you get a pandemic. You were running Ocean House. You had the numbers from Ocean House, so you could actually show the live impact of COVID. And before we get into that, just to highlight the EBITDA, EBITDA. If it's not something you understand, Google's your friend. Every accountant in the room will already know what it means. It's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It essentially is focusing a bit on the cash flow of the property without getting into how you are treated for taxes or for finance. So the point being is it helps you highlight the operating revenue from the company, from the business or this property after you deduct the operating expenses. So it shows you the net income. Mark, over to you. Talk about COVID.
Yeah, sure. So the reason this slide is in here, I know it's probably a bit small and I'm not going to go into it in a huge amount of detail, but obviously COVID was, I suppose, the ultimate stress test for many businesses. And this slide just sort of really is in here to sort of highlight the levels of sort of profitability in normal months, and then what happened obviously when we were forced to close, basically, or pretty much close. So as you can see, our burn rate when closed in this particular property was around about £3,000 a month, which obviously is not ideal. But through COVID, we were fortunate enough to obviously get all of the government grants and support, because the properties are all registered for rates, and obviously that was the trigger, I suppose, for all the support. But we recouped the losses from those 3 months in the first 2.5 to 3 weeks of trading in the summer, which obviously is far from ideal, having to close and obviously sort of losing money when you are closed. But it just goes to show really how resilient our model actually is. So yeah, from the profit in the moment that we opened, we had recouped the losses from all those months. So
yep. And to somewhat rain on that a little, it was coincidental that you were closed in the spring and opened during the high season. If you had been closed during the high season, obviously people can figure out those would be zeros and the other months aren't quite as good. But it is this idea that it is, as an automated business with good bookings, you end up with pretty good profitability, pretty good margins, and it is a great stress test. It's like, what happens if we close for 4 months? So.
Yeah, exactly that. It was, I suppose, the best stress test you could have, really. Obviously, you don't want it to happen, obviously, but it did happen, and we all just had to deal with it. That was the way it was for everyone, ultimately.
Yeah, and you can definitely see the occupancy numbers. Go ahead, Brenda.
I'm just going to jump in. Do you think then for future, Mark, that now that you've had something like that you'll go, what will we do again in the future? Is there a plan in place that maybe would mitigate that even more?
Yeah, ultimately, you just need to make sure that you've got cash reserves for something that's unplanned, ultimately. And that's something that all businesses should obviously, consider and have a reserves plan, so that if the worst happens, you can get through it ultimately.
Good strategy.
Very good. I think we've addressed all 5 of the questions on tonight's agenda. David, it's over to you now.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. And again, sort of last shout out, if anyone wants to add additional questions onto the Q&A, sort of last couple of moments before we move to the Q&A session. And Brenda, if you have any that you want to put to Mark before we head to wrap up. But thanks very much, sort of John and Mark, for going through that in such a good sort of thorough way. I think it's really good when you can sort of dissect what's sort of under the bonnet somewhat of this type of model. So repeatedly, you've been heard mention of the equity offer document, and this is really the key document to look at to really deep dive into the information. It's the document that you should look at, that you must look at before you make the investment. So we're pointing in that direction. If you go to our pitch page, if you go to the home page, there'll be a thumbnail for the Thurlestone project. When you click on the thumbnail, it'll take you to what's on the left-hand side of the screen, which is the pitch pages. You'll see along the bottom there, overview, financials, team, and then the forum. That's where you can access questions that have been asked by other investors, and then the answers given by Mark. It's a really good place to go because there'll be questions there you probably hadn't even thought of, or you might have a question other people haven't thought of. So if you put it on the forum, everyone gets the benefit, like multiple eyeballs, crowd validation, call it what you want. But it just means that Mark answers these questions, and in the interest of fairness and transparency, all would-be investors get the benefit of the answers. So it's a really important part of what crowdfunding platforms offer. So that's how when you've logged into the pitch page, where the wee arrow is there is where you then can download the equity offer document. And that's done after you become investor ready on the platform. So becoming investor ready, you need to do some KYC. They may ask you for an AML check, but you will have an appropriateness test or an investor test. And that's just to ensure that every investor understands the risk. So property is a high risk investment. Again, along the bottom there, it gives you the risk warning. It is a high risk category. So you need to be prepared that you could potentially lose all of the funds if for some reason the deal went completely wrong. So you need to be aware of that. And that Q&A just confirms that you understand the parameters of this type of investment. And if you then wish to invest, you click the next step button on the thumbnail, and then you can enter the amount that you wish to invest. You'll then have a choice of moving money directly into your e-wallet or paying by bank transfer via a unique reference number. And this at this stage is a hard pledge. And then once the project reaches its target, there's then the opportunity to view the shareholder agreement, which is the key legal document. Every investor becomes a shareholder in Mark's SPV, and you're a passive shareholder. You don't have any voting rights, but you are a full legal shareholder. So that comes from the shareholder agreement, which you have a chance to review. And then when you've accepted that and transferred your funds is when you become a full legal shareholder and part of the project. Yes, John?
Question from the audience. If I pledge and then I don't like the shareholder agreement for whatever reason, what happens to my money?
Okay, so one of the advantages of using crowdfunding is that until you accept the shareholder agreement, you're in control of your own funds. So the funds are effectively ring-fenced for this project. But if you decide for some reason that you don't wish to proceed, there might be a clause in the shareholder agreement that you're not sure about, or your circumstances have just changed for some reason. You may have an emergency in the family. You then can cancel your hard pledge and not go forward.
Very good.
So that is the process for that. So Brenda, any questions have come in, or anything you want to put forward from the forum?
Yeah, just a few bits and pieces. So You mentioned occupancy earlier on, Mark. How do you estimate this? Is there a UK average that you would be looking to hit, or is that what you're taking it from?
We don't really need to estimate it, because actually we've got all of the management information from all of our other properties. So we know what is achievable based on the rates that we choose to charge at the different times of year. Obviously, there's different demand at different times of year, and we know sort of by studying the data from all of our other properties what we can charge up to achieve the occupancy that we want to get at that particular time of year, basically. Hopefully that makes sense.
A follow-on question, just to highlight. So if you put a pin in the map for where this property is, approximately how far is the furthest away property you have? Just a guess.
1.5 miles.
Is the furthest away or the closest?
Closest, sorry.
Okay, so furthest away.
Falmouth. That would be 25 miles from St Ives, I suppose.
Okay, so across 25 miles, how many rentable units do you have, the individual things that people could book?
Yeah, so 70 live rooms across, or units, so apartments and rooms across the 3 towns. So Penzance, St Ives and Falmouth.
Okay, and that's where your data is coming from, right?
Yeah, exactly that. So we've got Ocean House in St Ives, which we've been running for 3.5-4 years. Another property, the Nook in St Ives, which is a property that we manage for clients, but that's 11 rooms as well in St Ives. So they're perfect sort of data capture for this property. But also it's exactly the same model that we run in the other towns, but obviously every town is slightly different. But yeah, we understand the differences between the different towns because of the properties that we have in all of them, basically.
Okay. So just to follow on from that, serviced accommodation, why choose the serviced accommodation model? What makes it a serviced accommodation property? You know, how is it different from a guest house that you say, someone says, oh yes, that's serviced accommodation and that's traditional guest house?
I suppose traditional guest house you'd be hosted by the owners generally, and potentially have the option of having breakfast made for you in the morning. Yeah, that really is the traditional model. Whereas our model, which is self-catering and self-check-in and self-check-out, that really is the difference between the two, basically.
Okay. And are there, trying to think of the term for this, are there boxes you have to check? Do you have to register it with a government body, or is it literally just you self-dominate or denominate even?
No, the properties have the right planning class to be run traditionally, or as what we would call serviced accommodation. So no, we can. Yeah, it's up to the business owners how they run their business. Simple as that, really.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
fine.
that's coming back to, that's the point about the C1 designation and planning.
Mhm.
These are not residential properties. They're not C3s.
Yeah.
Okay. So the automated model, do you have many overheads for this, or does it basically, the service accommodation automated model cuts down completely on your overheads? Does it work out more cost effective basically, or is there a different element to it?
It does reduce the costs because obviously the staff is kept to a minimum. There's no one sort of making breakfasts. We're not buying food. There's no one on site sort of 24 hours a day, having to taking a wage, so to speak. So yeah, that's it's very lean on humans, basically.
Are there overheads even from the point of view where you have more turnaround of guests? Is there more wear and tear or not?
The wear and there isn't more wear and tear. We have very specific booking rules, which actually which is part of our sort of strategy to encourage or discourage short stays. So we don't take one-day bookings, for example, unless there's a one-day gap in the calendar and all the software is set up for that reason, because obviously one-day bookings are the least profitable booking because of the cost of turning the room and the linen and the cleaning. So obviously we want as long a stays as is possible, and we want to minimize short stays. So that's just one technique that we use to to increase profit, really.
Okay. I have a question then, just more about the process of investing and how soon the shareholders agreement is sent to potential investors after they pledge. Do you want to answer that one, David?
Yep. So the ideal scenario would be as soon as the raise reaches its minimum target, that the next day or certainly a couple of days after is when the shareholder agreement is sent out for a draft form for first review by the shareholders. Sometimes there might be a point of clarification or a slight change might be required. Normally not, but that is a process where shareholders can have a look. I think one of the, again, advantages of crowdfunding is you very often have a lot of property professionals who perhaps have made their money or perhaps just like the project and they'll invest in it, and they read the shareholder agreement with their experience. You might have a commercial lawyer, you might have an accountant, you might have someone who's done a lot of these in the past. So that feeding back to the fundraiser sometimes actually can add good clarity to the shareholder agreement. So when that process is finished, it goes back out again for the final acceptance. So to be specific, normally we like to have the shareholder agreement go out within a couple of days of the target being reached. So
Mark, you've touched sort of on training and education, and you see this as maybe an educational opportunity. How do you envisage that coming about? How do you, because we've maybe had in the past where people think they're going to be on site with someone nearly throughout the entire process, as opposed to someone who just wants to be completely passive and just take the potential returns. But how would you manage expectations? What in your mind would you be thinking would be a good educational overview of this for potential investors?
Well, I suppose it's more of a sort of financial element to the education, really, rather than physically how the property runs, because obviously that's not going to be possible for people to visit the property and that sort of stuff.
Unless they pay. They could do it that way. So.
They come and stay, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's more a case of obviously all of the quarterly updates, obviously they will be party to, and all of the documentation that gets produced over time as to obviously the performance of the property and what's happening from a financial perspective, really. So obviously and also the actual shareholders agreement, all of that, reading all of that and sort of going through the process of understanding that is part of the education ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, is that all, Brenda?
That's basically it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So I think that takes us to the end of the presentation tonight. So there's how you can get in touch with us. So investors@LEOcrowdfunding.com. If you've got any onboarding queries or you're just not sure about some of the process of onboarding and making your investment, you can contact us there. If there's anything of a technical nature, then there's support@leocrowdfunding.com. Now, we would encourage everyone to take 2 minutes and go to leocrowdfunding.com/risk-summary. This is important because it contains the information that's relevant to the appropriateness test. So I would encourage you to have a read at that, and then you'll find that some of the questions that you're asked in the appropriateness test will the context of those questions will perhaps be helpful. So definitely go there and have a look. So anything that anyone wants to say to finish off, John, Mark?
Not from me, just thank you for having me, and hopefully that's been really useful for everyone that's attended, and then obviously the people that will get the recording. And yeah, we'd just encourage people to, if they've got queries, go on to your website and put questions in the forum, and I will obviously answer them.
Yep. Anything, Brenda?
Nope, all good
Anything
from me.
else? Brilliant. So again, just to remind everyone, this is the second in a series of 3. So this time next week, there will be another one of these. We're again looking at different aspects of this. So the key thing is listen to all 3, read the equity offer document, read the risk summary, and then you have all the information you need to make an informed decision if this is an investment for you or not. So delighted you could join us tonight. If you're listening to the recording, hope you enjoyed it, and we will see hopefully most of you again next week. So thanks everyone. All the best. Bye-bye.